everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Divorce and Separation Coach podcast. This week, we're talking about infidelity, and in particular, how to heal from the sense of betrayal and regain strength. So today, to discuss this topic, I've invited Polly Bloom. Polly is a divorce coach and clinical hypnotherapist, and she specializes in supporting individuals whose marriages have ended after 2 or 3 decades, often due to a spouse's affair. With compassionate guidance and transformative techniques, she helps her clients to navigate heartbreak, rebuild confidence, gain clarity after chaos, and especially embrace a new chapter. Polly, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's been lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Chloe.
I appreciate you sharing your insights because you've got so much experience of working with people who've really gone through this heartbreak and sense of betrayal. From your perspective, what are the most common emotions that people struggle with when they have been cheated upon and then that led to the end of their marriage?
Well, it's, a shock for a lot of people because it's come completely out the blue. Sometimes I've heard of couples, on the Thursday evening, they're sitting down to plan an exotic holiday, and on Friday, their partner has left. And the shock, the confusion, and the sense of betrayal is huge. Whenever anybody goes through a breakup and divorce, there's sadness. It's not an easy process, as we well know. But added to that, when you're facing a cheating partner, the self-doubt, why didn't you see it coming?
I should have known.
Yes, all those questions. Exactly that, the how, the when, and most certainly the biggest question is why.
Yeah.
Why did they do that? Because they have nothing they don't have answers because the person has left, and they don't actually get the answers that would make them feel any better.
Yeah.
So there's no closure, and that's the pain point.
And usually the why is not a very simple answer anyway, is it?
No.
There's a lot of complexity behind why people do what they do. And so that it probably doesn't give you that satisfaction either way.
No, and we were just talking, weren't we, about the common reasons for cheating. And, there might be emotional disconnection within the relationship, lack of intimacy. The person may have very low self-esteem. They're impulsive. An opportunity occurs. A desire for, excitement, a novelty in their life. And then there can be, a sense of entitlement or revenge because of something, resentment that's crept into the relationship. So there's so many different reasons as to why. But the client that's left, robbed of the relationship and the happiness and their identity, they're left traumatized. But that's when it's about working on them rather than looking out of themselves all the time to get the answers. However, then that can be a little bit tricky because as you well know, Chloe, that when we can't find the answers to something, if we're not given the answer, we'll then look internally
ourselves.
for the answer. And then that can be tricky because you can spiral yourself downwards into, depression, low self-esteem, because you're actually, the answers that you're finding are quite negative. It's because, I let them down. I'm not good enough. And that's not helpful for anyone.
No, and it definitely doesn't help you with the moving on piece. What I find quite tricky as well, and I don't know, I don't think you can say one situation is harder than the other, but for those who are betrayed and whose spouse cheats, to also have to be the decision maker and end a marriage that actually they wanted. And I've seen that happen quite a bit with various clients where they they were the one who was betrayed, but they decided, I can't live with that, and I don't think the relationship can survive this, and so I want to end the marriage. Whereas actually the other person might be perfectly happy continuing as things were going.
Yes.
What has been your sense through that experience of working with people?
Well, if you are going to come back from a relationship that's involved infidelity, there are things that need to be put into place. It's having actionable steps. It's not just saying, okay, I forgive you, let's move on. Then there needs to be work done on the relationship, be it that you go to marriage guidance together, that you ask the questions as to, well, what was happening at that point in our marriage that you hadn't felt the need to look outside of the marriage. What was happening for you, what was happening in the relationship, because it is three things, isn't it? It's the husband, wife, and the relationship. So we're all individuals, and we all have other things going on in our lives, maybe at work, there's stress. But if you don't communicate, if you don't actually sit down and, explain the way you're feeling, then the other person hasn't got a clue, and they can't do anything with nothing.
That's a good point.
So I think that the thing that comes up for my clients is that their partner's left without any explanation, like the shock of not knowing, thinking that everything's fine,
and overnight
gone. And majority of the clients that gravitate towards me are women that have been in a marriage for 2 to 3 decades, and they've raised their family, and their children have gone off as they should, living a full life, and then the husband goes, walks out. And I do have men as well, so the wife and me. But then they're left looking at everything that they've worked for, what they've put into the relationship, and they're sitting there thinking, well, what's my role? What's my purpose? They've lost their identity that's first and foremost been a wife and a mother. And
so how do you help people in that situation? I mean, whether they stay or go, actually, after having experienced infidelity from the other side, how do you rebuild that self-confidence, that self-esteem, and self-worth?
Yes, we know that healing takes time, but more importantly, healing is about taking action. So it's understanding, it's having self-awareness. And self-awareness is about who you are, what your values are, what your beliefs are, but also externally, how people see you. And once you start working on understanding who you are, it's a lot to do with emotional intelligence. And I like Gabor Mate, and he says that trauma isn't what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside of you because of what happens to you.
Okay.
So because I do have clients that have been diagnosed with PTSD.
Really? From the betrayal?
Because of the betrayal. And so then it's actually, being compassionate, self-compassion, as I say, it's processing the experience, not being hard on yourself. But my advice is, to find some small activities to do. One of the things is being decisive, because when this happens, you start to doubt everything, your own judgment, and you feel like you're incapable of trusting yourself, let alone anybody else. So it's really important to take those steps to do something small where you're making a decision, and you don't ask anybody else to help you in making that decision.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a huge decision, but you just make that decision, and you do that for yourself. So that's one small step in, as I say, healing by taking actions. Also, I don't know if you've heard of Martha Beck, and
no.
She wrote the book about Beyond Anxiety, and she talks a lot about the anxiety gremlins that we have. And obviously, when you're going through a divorce, there's a lot of worry and anxiety that comes. One of the things that she speaks about is creativity, and how creativity is really important. And we're all creative as children, but somehow as we grow into adults, we lose that. We're sort of rushed into our busy lives and busy with our children who are being creative, but we don't actually stop to be creative ourselves. And so when you do something, be it that, you like drawing, or, you've got these great colouring books now, doing some colouring. Once you sort of do something like that, you're engaged in that activity, and then that dials down all that sense of frustration and as I say, anxiety. So these are ways to help yourself. Help a therapist. It's good to talk. A divorce coach, and groups, connecting with people, making sure you get out and see your friends. But there's a lot of around the injustice and the unfairness of everything, and again, it's being aware of that, but taking steps to, rather than look to keep blaming, you actually turn it around. You start working on yourself. What can I do to change, reframe what's going on, reframe your thinking, change the way you're thinking. I always think of the traffic light system, as soon as a negative thought comes into my mind, or the narrative is detrimental, it's very negative, then I'll say stop. Think of the traffic light system. I'm going through this. I'm on go. What thoughts of
stopping the cycle
around, but then stop, and change how you are speaking to yourself, and self-blame, etc. It's not helpful at all.
And you touch on a good element, which is that need for emotional justice. And my situation wasn't about adultery, but I do remember feeling a sense of moral impunity from the other side. And how is he getting away with this? How is there nobody out there who's going to call him out on his poor behavior? And unfortunately, one of the downsides of the very positive change otherwise, with the introduction of no-fault divorce, is that there is no emotional justice as part of the divorce process. And so how do you help people with that, that need to, in a way, get their day in court and feel that somebody is recognizing their hurt and what's been done to them, with the fact that that's just not part of the process?
And that is tough. And I remember going through that myself, just as you've explained. Because, not having ever stepped into a law office before to discuss divorce, I just thought, oh, well, he's done some terrible things. This is wrong. So he will be accordingly punished. Well, unfortunately, that is not how it works. We know that the legal system is about legal fairness, not emotional justice. And people can feel like, well, what's happened to them isn't being recognised.
Exactly.
Infidelity or emotional abuse, and so they don't feel like that it's validated. They don't feel validated. But one of the things that I say to my clients is that we can't change that. Like I say, the legal system is to make sure that financially and with the children, everything is fair and equal. So the closure has to come from yourself.
Yeah.
And acceptance again, about and fostering, personal healing and self-care. Turn it back onto yourself. It's no good worrying about something you cannot change. It's important to think about what you can control, not what you can't. And even though it's really, really hard to let go of that, the unfairness of it all, it's not going to serve you by, going over and over and over and over that in your mind.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's the difficult part. I know that I personally found it very difficult, and I've seen clients deal with that kind of challenge as well. But are there some actual practical strategies, either through hypnotherapy, I know that you practice hypnotherapy as well, or through your divorce coaching practice, that you can help people to let go of that resentment or, being stuck in that painful place?
Definitely. I mean, one of the things is when we're stressed is we hold it in our bodies. We're not actually aware of our breathing. Obviously, we're all breathing.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be here if we couldn't breathe. but it's actually sitting down and being aware of how deeply you're breathing, and if you're taking it, up into your nose and down into your lungs, your diaphragm, you could actually have mindful breathing. And what I do with the hypnotherapy is I can help people with a relaxation, with the breathing, and then completely relaxing, thinking it's like a progressive muscle relaxation. So you go from the top of your head right down to the tips of your
like a body scan.
Yes, but also I do like an emotional clearance, which is again, it comes back to reframing your thoughts, but imagining through like a metaphor of your worries and woes, leaving you. That I can give you an example of, you can imagine that you're sitting by a river, so you're peacefully, you're under a tree, you're asleep, you're resting, and you can imagine the leaves falling from the trees, and then the leaf falls into the river that's running beside you, or the stream, and then you can imagine that the particular worry that's dominating your mind is on that leaf. And then that
it's
leaf
drifting away.
Drifts away, and it goes downstream, and you can visualize it going away from you, and then eventually it trickles over rocks and boulders, and then enters into the river, and eventually out into the ocean, and it's gone. So it's a visualization of that going. Now that if that's repeated and practiced, then that can alleviate a lot of the tension that's building up and the stress.
Yeah.
You feel you can cope. You're making space to be able to cope. And we all know with divorce, you're making really important life-changing decisions.
Yeah.
But if your mind is full of the emotion of the how, the when, the whys, then you're not making space, because you're for the the major life-changing decisions, because you're still in the story of the divorce, and that's fine. But again, it comes back to the healing and taking actionable steps to help yourself.
Yeah, to move forward.
To move forward, I mean, you can sit and you can wallow, and that's fine, but that's for a wallow for a certain period of time.
And then give yourself permission to move on.
Yeah, and even if it's one little step, even if it's like journaling, writing out how you're feeling every day. And I always think that that's a really good benchmark, because when you're in a place when there's light at the end of the tunnel, and there will be, as we well know, there will be, you can look back at your journal, and that would be a really good gauge to see how far you've come, because you'll read what you've written, like, I'm feeling so stressed, I can't cope with this, how could he do this, how could she do that? You'll then look at that and say, oh wow, I was so
come a long way.
Yeah, I've come so far, and so it's practice, small practices to help you move forward.
I guess there's an element of accepting that it's a process as well, and that it's going to take a bit of time. It's been a major event in your life.
Yes, and it's no quick fix, and I think one of the things that comes across, I know this happened to myself, but there were people saying, well, the divorce, you've signed the divorce, the final order, the ink's dried, so move on. That's it. But it's not as simple as A, B, C, D. Yeah. There's still things going on. Life goes on. And if you have children, then you're going to still have involvement with that person. When somebody... When we grieve because we've lost a loved one, that's, of course, excruciatingly painful, but the closure is there. Yeah.
And there's also that I guess that acceptance by society that you're grieving, which is less there when it comes to grieving the end of a relationship.
Yes, exactly that. And I had spoke to one client, and she felt quite irritated by particular friends who just seem to think we're all right now.
And that's also the other thing is, I've got clients who ask me, how long does it take to get over your divorce? How long is a piece of string? It really depends, and it's not helpful to compare yourself to others, because everyone has their own journey.
Exactly that. And I think the wounds of infidelity run very deep.
Yeah.
And like I said, learning to trust is the biggest emotion really that comes out of it. It's because also it's trusting yourself, because you can feel so foolish, so stupid that you didn't see what was happening.
Yeah.
But certain individuals are very manipulative and expert at deceit.
It's not necessarily about you.
Yeah, exactly that. And that's the one thing I was saying, when people go inward and they start blaming themselves, their marriage to them wasn't a lie. It was the other person. It was the other person who made a choice to cheat. I think it's to free those people, should free themselves up from thinking it's anything to do with them. Yeah. We all have a choice in life.
Absolutely. But I think the risk is, of course, if you aren't able to heal properly from that, is how do you avoid taking that with you in your next relationship, for example? And, will you ever trust somebody again? How do you work through that?
Well, I think first of all, forgiveness, when I talk about forgiveness, it's not letting the other person off the hook. The forgiveness is for yourself.
Yeah. Because
otherwise you will be carrying the baggage of your relationship, of your marriage into your next relationship. And my advice is to clients is give yourself time to know who you are first and foremost. And this is from my own personal experience, Chloe, because I was married for 27 years, which is a long time.
Yeah.
And my ex-husband had betrayed me on so many levels, had many affairs. Again, I was that person who felt completely foolish and stupid. How did I not pick up on this? My gut had told me things, but I had explained it away all they had. So, so I was on my own for a while, and then I was encouraged by friends. Oh, why don't you go dating again? And at first it was like no, and then I thought, well, somebody set me up with somebody on a blind date, and I thought, well, what have I got to lose? Bit of fun, but that was another lesson for me in life. It was the universe saying, no, you're not ready. Because I realized that I hadn't healed, and I was trying to jump from the frying pan into the fire. So after that experience, which wasn't very pleasant, I then made a decision. The decision being that I needed to find happiness from within, work out who I am. It goes back to that self-awareness. So I reframed a lot of thoughts, a lot of thinking, because I was sitting there with my meal for one on my lap, raising my beautiful daughters and, a family, and sitting there feeling very sorry for myself, thinking, how did I get here? But I then reframed it and then thought, well, now, I've put all my years into my family. Now it's time for me. Yeah. And I may have my meal for one, but I know exactly, I've bought this, I remember.
I chose it. I chose what time to eat it.
Yeah, I chose it, and I can eat it at whatever time I want to eat it, and I can then go and have a lovely hot bubbly bath, and without anyone demanding anything of me. Yeah. So that's just a simple way of how you start to change the self-talk, reframe your situation. Yeah. We keep telling ourselves, this is awful, this is bad, woe is me, woe is me. We spiral ourselves down to behaving like that. Yeah. Whereas if we say, well, actually, this is a great opportunity now to do things that I could never have done before. And I say to clients that the divorce is the agent to your transformation.
I like that.
So yeah. As I said, it's painful experience, and you're allowed to wallow, but don't stay down there.
Yeah, it's not getting stuck
too long. And get the help. Talk to your friends, get a support group, coaches, therapists. Even get involved in a local group, such as, it could be a Zumba class, it could be a running club. Start getting out there and meeting people. But, forgiveness plays a role in your healing. And it's liberating. Yeah.
And you touched on something earlier, which I think is also really important and maybe even key. It's also accepting or coming to terms with the fact that it says something about your spouse or your ex-spouse, not about you. And that, knowing that it's them who was the problem, not you. All you did was trust them. There's nothing wrong with trusting somebody. That is also a good way of not bringing that with you, because it's not part of you. It's part of them.
Yes, yes.
I would think that would help a lot of people in making that transition.
Most certainly. And I think, like you've just said, when you actually get married, a relationship is built on trust. That's number one thing. Yeah. So if you've entered that marriage with those values and you uphold those values throughout your marriage, then that shows what sort of person you are.
Exactly.
And if they haven't valued that trust, then that shows what sort of person they are.
Yeah. But you're not the fool for having trusted them. Actually,
no.
They're the fool for having broken that trust.
Yes. Yes.
I think that's an important message. So before we wrap up, I like to finish the podcast, Paula, with a short summary. And maybe you can share your top 3 tips for people who are going through this experience of having been cheated on by a husband and wife and are going through divorce and are really struggling to let go of that pain and that resentment.
Oh, top 3 tips. Let me see. I would say to work on yourself. As I say, healing isn't just about time, it's about the actions that you take to help yourself to heal.
Yeah.
I would, look at getting support for 100%.
Yeah.
Because rather than have all these thoughts in here, by talking, you get them out. And then, you can have some great strategies and techniques to help you deal daily. I know that myself, I saw a psychotherapist many years ago, but I didn't have anything tangible.
Okay.
Brilliant talking, but I didn't have anything that could help me on a daily basis when these uncomfortable feelings, emotions reared their ugly head.
Yeah.
So that's why I say have some actionable steps, something tangible that you can do every single day, be it an affirmations, well, that's how many is that? That's 2 steps. Is it 2 tips?
2.5, maybe. We can stop there if you don't have a third. There's no pressure.
But I think it's self-compassion, being kind to yourself, and not thinking that you should be out the other side and everything's fine.
Yeah.
It takes time, and like we say, everybody's divorce story is different.
Yeah.
And everybody's emotional intelligence is different. But get the help.
Yeah.
And so that you don't take the baggage,
yeah,
your previous relationship into the next one.
I love that. So how can people find you, Polly, if they want to speak to you because they feel that you're the right person to help them through this?
They can reach me through my website, which is www.divorceseparationcoach.co.uk. I'm on social media, so they can reach out through social media. Just give me a call. It doesn't hurt to just have a chat. It's a chat that is free, and we could just have a conversation, and maybe just in that conversation find some healing.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Polly.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Chloe.